Prime Minister, as usual, you would expect us to be on top of our brief. We know that you're on top of your brief, so we don't need the background to every answer. I'm sure you'll just answer the questions that we're asking, and if not, we'll chivvy you along.
Keir Starmer walked into this grilling with one simple task: give direct answers, don't room for spin. No committees to hide behind, no promises of future reviews, just straight, accountable leadership. But what we got instead? A masterclass in political evasion. Time and again, when asked for specifics, Starmer offered vagueness. When challenged on poverty, he spoke of future reports. When pushed for immediate action, he floated eventual growth. When the country wanted clarity, he served them feelings. It wasn't leadership, it was therapy speak. He had the stage, the moment, the opportunity to define what Britain would look like under his rule. Instead, we got emotional reassurance over concrete governance. There were no numbers, no targets, no clear roadmap, just soft promises that people would feel better off, feel safer. Believe the NHS is improving. It's a familiar tactic. Use warm language to avoid cold facts. Paint success in emotions, not in measurable change. And for a man who's had years to prepare for this role, that lack of detail is damning. It reveals one of two things. Either he's dodging responsibility intentionally, or there's simply no real plan behind the curtain.
But I wanted just to start with you seeing what reflections you've got. You've been in post for a year now, and I wondered if you could give us a quick vignette, a picture of what you think the UK, what you want the UK to look like in 3 years' time after the first term or so of your premiership.
I want people to feel better off, and there has to be a central focus on living standards. I want them to feel, as they will, that the health service is working much better, is there for them and their families in a way that it hasn't been for many years. And I want them to feel safe and secure both in their immediate neighbourhood and as a country, both our borders and national security and defence. So they're the three things that I'm focused on more than anything else, those three things. I want them to feel that we've cleared up the mess that we inherited after the election. It was a huge mess because we had a broken economy and broken public services, and that we're on the road to rebuilding the country.
Okay, thank you. And what about child poverty? What would you like to see as progress on that?
Well, I mean, poverty and tackling poverty and breaking down barriers has to be central to everything that we do. People will not feel better off or safe and secure if we haven't tackled poverty. But I'm very clear in my own mind that we must tackle poverty by putting in the support that is needed, but also break down the barriers to opportunity, because otherwise we won't fix the very deep and complex causes of poverty, and that's why it's central to what we are doing. And it's not a one department issue, it's across all departments because it is so complicated and deep rooted, but it's got to be more than just support to deal with poverty as it is today, but also to put in place the measures to ensure that people can get out of poverty and stay out of poverty. And that's why, broadly speaking, the strategy we've adopted has four limbs to it. The first is to increase income, the money coming into people's pockets, if you like, into their household, to decrease costs to them, to strengthen the local support they have, particularly back into work, but in other ways, and to boost financial resilience. And I'm very proud of the fact that the last Labour government drove down poverty, and I'm determined this government's going to as well.
Keir Starmer says he wants people to feel better off, to feel like the NHS is working, to feel safe and secure. But beyond these emotional markers, he offers no real policy roadmap to back them up. Even when pressed on child poverty, he speaks in vague generalities: increase income, reduce costs, strengthen support, build resilience without a single mechanism, timeline, or measurable goal. One of the most telling patterns in Starmer's answers is how consistently he sidesteps accountability. Instead of outlining clear steps to fix broken housing enforcement or tackle legal backlogs, he hides behind process-heavy language, internal stocktakes, system reviews, and strategic assessments. This isn't leadership, it's bureaucratic deflection. The language of governance efficiency is being used not to deliver change, but to delay it, whether it's fear of overpromising or simply a lack of urgency. The result is the same: a leader who manages headlines, not crises, and that undermines his whole message. Because no one feels better off when their rights depend on a system buried under delays and indecision.
Because one of the issues, Prime Minister, you may be aware, is that a number of landlords, including local authorities, are saying that they're struggling in terms of the funding and enforcement to carry out those necessary checks. We've heard that the courts, we know that there's a backlog in the courts in terms of residents bringing forward those cases. So just coming back to that enforceability, Prime Minister, as a lawyer, you know, for anything to be enforceable, it has to have the right protection around it. So just wanting to know if there's been discussions and that interdepartmental discussions to make sure that these cases are escalated when tenants bring them before the courts.
Yes, there have been, and one of the ways in which I've set up the work of government is to have key ministers on key commitments reporting in to me for a stocktake on a regular basis, where we go through progress, what measures are in place, etc. And housing, as you would expect, is one of those. There are 6 areas where we have these regular stocktakes, and housing is one of them. So the Deputy Prime Minister and her team come into number 10. We have a session where we go through a number of different issues, but decent standards and housing and enforceability is among them.
You can hear it in how Starmer frames his responses. Key ministers will report to me for a stocktake. It sounds like accountability, but it commits to nothing, especially for tenants facing real housing and legal crises right now. Over and over, Starmer substitutes long-term structural fixes for immediate relief. Nowhere is that disconnect clearer than in his stance on housing allowance. Freezing the housing allowance has pushed countless families further into poverty. Yet rather than offering short-term support or reversing the freeze, Starmer doubles down, insisting things will get better eventually, once new homes are built, but construction takes years. Struggling families can't wait on blueprints. This reveals a deep failure to grasp the urgency of the moment. Starmer speaks of tackling poverty, but his policies actively prolong it. His message to Britain's most vulnerable is effectively, hold tight, help is on the way. But that's not leadership. That's delay in disguise. And it completely undermines his own vision of a country where people already feel better off. Because you can't feel secure when your rent's rising. Your benefits are frozen, and the only answer from government is wait.
Okay, you'll recall last time we met, Prime Minister, I asked you about the government's decision to freeze the local housing allowance. And coming back to the issue around child poverty, this is an area which is keeping many children and their families in poverty because they cannot afford the rent. The recent data from the local government association responsible for all councils shows that there's a funding gap of around £7 million over the last 5 years. This is a key area pushing many people more into poverty. So I asked you again, Prime Minister, do you think that that was the right decision from a government that's ambitious on tackling child poverty?
Look, I think I defend the decisions we've made. Obviously, we head into the autumn. We will get to another budget. There'll be a chance to look again across the board. But we certainly made the right decision first time round. I think I'd also emphasise something I touched on last time, which is, in the end, with housing, we need to build and make available more housing across the board. There simply isn't enough, and that
but
means
the starts, Prime Minister, you may have seen are quite low. We're not building those houses quickly enough, and we will see more people and more children in poverty. We can't build our way out of this crisis. So in the interim, what more can the government do to help alleviate that poverty?
Well,
that families
as I
are
say,
facing?
there'll be a child poverty strategy which we're setting out in the autumn. We will go into the budget in the autumn as well, and alleviating poverty is a priority of mine. I do think that we need to build more, though, and we have to build more because we've had a problem for many years of not building enough social and affordable housing in this country. And until we crack that problem, we will never be able to get to the fundamental roots of the failures here. And that's why, on that issue in particular, I'm pressing the Deputy Prime Minister very.
Starmer continues to defend the housing allowance freeze as the right decision at the time, quickly shifting the conversation to long-term housing construction while ignoring the immediate funding gaps and skyrocketing rent pressures families are facing now. Before we continue, are you finding this video helpful? If yes, please like, share and subscribe for more breakdowns of the critical political shifts unfolding in Britain. Let's get back to it now. When it comes to disabled people, government is knowingly making a decision that will harm tens of thousands. A choice to cut the universal credit health element is projected to push 50,000 newly disabled people into poverty by April next year. That's not a guess, it's based on his own governance projections, and, instead of confronting this crisis directly, Starmer retreats behind an upcoming review and vague promises about working with employers to support disabled workers. It's a textbook delay tactic. Acknowledge the pain, blame the process, offers soft engagement strategies as proof of action, but for disabled families, this isn't a think tank exercise. It's a question of whether they can survive. Starmer claims not every change takes years, but when pressed on what help will be available in the next 8 months, he offers nothing. No reversal, no emergency support, no protection. And here's the reality: the very review Starmer leans on, led by Charlie Mayfield, isn't even expected until late autumn. And Mayfield himself says it could take several years for any real change in the labour market to support disabled employment. So, the question is simple. They have 8 months. What's your plan, Prime Minister? Because families living on the edge can't eat promises, and disabled people pushed into poverty don't have the luxury of waiting on reforms that might arrive years too late.
On that very point, you'll be aware that there is still projections that your government has put forward that estimate 50,000 newly disabled people in April next year will be pushed into poverty because of the reduction in the UC health element of the bill. Now, you mentioned about getting more disabled people into work. Charlie Mayfield, who, as you know, is doing the Keep Britain Working review, not to be published until later this autumn, Prime Minister, has said it will take several years before the labour market changes in order to allow more people to be employed, disabled people to be employed, but also to retain disabled people. So my question to you is, several years, 8 months, what are we going to do to mitigate against the potential pushing of another 50,000 people, disabled people, newly disabled people, and their families into poverty?
Well, I think the Mayfield report is coming in the autumn with the final recommendations, so we obviously need to look at that piece of work, and that is focused, as you know, on what employers can do. I don't accept that everything is going to take years. Some changes do take years, but not all changes take years, and we have to do work in the interim to give that support to those with disabilities.
What specifically had you in mind, given that we've had a disability employment gap for, well over 10 years?
Well, I think there's a lot of work can be done with employers to encourage them to take on and to retain. That doesn't need primary legislation. I've seen pilot examples of it across the country, which I'd like to see many more of, that have been very, very successful. So, yes, I accept that, if you want to pass legislation, it'll probably take some time. I don't accept that every change that is needed, some of them that I've seen for myself have been quite effective, don't need legislation at all, and I think we can get on with.
When challenged, Starmer responded by pointing to the Mayfield review, saying not every change takes years, and that the government must work with employers to encourage them to hire and retain disabled workers. But this response was vague, employer-focused, and critically avoided reversing the cuts or offering any immediate protections. The most damaging blow to Starmer's broader narrative is economic. Independent analysis shows that the poorest 40% of households will be £1,200 worse off within 3 years under his policies. This comes despite repeated promises that people would feel better off. Instead of acknowledging this or announcing corrective action, Starmer fell back on a familiar refrain: economic growth will solve it all. Regional inequality will be tackled in time, but that's not a poverty strategy. Growth without direct redistribution or immediate relief rarely helps those at the bottom. In fact, it often makes inequality worse by relying so heavily on projections of future growth. Starmer is effectively asking struggling households to wait for a recovery that might never come. This isn't bold leadership, it's political wish-casting, and the people paying the price are those with the least to spare.
Is the ambition that everybody in our society should feel better off in 3 years' time, including the poorest 40% of households?
Yes.
So you'll be aware of some quite troubling forecasts from, for example, the Joseph Rowntree Foundation that says that, in fact, having looked at all the measures that the government's announced on the table by the summer, the bottom 40% of households are not going to be better off in 3 years' time. They're actually going to be £1,200 a year worse off. So what do you think needs to change between now and the end of the Parliament so that everybody in our society is in fact enjoying higher living standards?
Well, we need to do a number of things. The first is we've got to get much better growth into our economy and create more wealth in the first place, and that's why we've put so much store on ensuring that we took necessary measures at the budget to deal with our inheritance. We then had a spending review which was targeted across the country, this question of making sure that if there is a thriving economy, it's a thriving economy in every part of the country and not just in some parts of the country. And it's why we've already in the spending review focused on things like the living wage, the national wage, and the minimum wage, and ensuring that wages are going up. They've gone up more in the last 10 months, they went up in the last 10 years. So that's the first part. The second part then is the poverty strategy that has to ensure that this is across the whole of society and every location, because in addition, as you will know, to the growth figures, we've had inequality variances across the country, place by place. and we have to have a laser focus on that, because whilst we want more wealth creation and the economy to thrive, and we do and we will, we can't have that as London and South East and redistribution as a sort of one-word answer for the rest of the country. To my mind, that is fundamentally wrong.
Starmer responds by saying we've got to get much better growth into our economy. He points to policies like the living wage and minimum wage. He insists redistribution can't be the only answer. It's aspirational language, but it doesn't confront the forecast that millions will be worse off. So what was this really? A leader asked for clarity but delivering only comfort words. Yes, promises were made, but most were built on feelings, on future reviews, on long-term hopes, not immediate action. And if Starmer can't give straight answers when directly asked what happens when the stakes are even higher, are future reviews and long-term growth just excuses to delay real action on poverty and housing? Let us know in the comments, and if you want more videos like this, like, share and subscribe for updates on British politics and how it's unfolding. Until next time, stay tuned.